Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. This next interview is with a really, really good friend of mine who I'm super excited for you to hear from. Her name is Kara Lissy. She is a licensed social worker, and I had the pleasure of connecting with her over Instagram, and she was able to talk with my one-on-one clients and provide so much value about seasonal depression and maybe just, why you might be feeling sad, like knowing the difference between seasonal depression and, just the aftermath of COVID. And it was so informative, so educational. So I had to have her on the podcast. So I'm so excited for you to hear from her. Kara, welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So let's just jump right in. The first question I always ask my guests is to introduce yourself by sharing who you are, what you do, and most importantly, why you do what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So I am a licensed clinical social worker, LCSW. I have worked in the field of behavioral health, psychiatry, mental health for the last 8 years. I started in a psychiatric hospital. I worked a little bit in the outpatient, kind of hopped back and forth between doing therapy and then doing crisis management in the ER, which was really great experience. But I've always known that I wanted to end up in private practice. So eventually, my journey led me to a Good Place Therapy, which is where I am right now. And we are located in the right on the border of where FIDI meets Tribeca, so downtown near City Hall. And I've been there for about 3 years now. I'm coming up on 3 years, and I absolutely love being a therapist. I see individuals primarily. Occasionally, I'll do sessions with family members and children if need be, but it's mostly individual work. A lot of young professionals, very ambitious, highly perfectionistic, a lot of anxiety. Living in New York City, it can be very anxiety provoking for a variety of reasons, in addition to what we have going on right now. Depression, life transitions, all of that kind of good stuff. And I'd say my main mode of the way I work with people is cognitive behavioral therapy based. So I take, and I'll probably talk a little bit about this maybe later if we want, but it's just looking at your thoughts and your feelings and how they affect your behaviors. And why I do what I do is basically because I went through a lot myself growing up with depression and anxiety, and I experienced a really, really wonderful therapist as a result of that. And ever since, that's where my life took me. It was like, I want to be the person on the other end of that couch. I want to be sitting, talking to somebody else, helping them go through what I was going through. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what landed me here. I feel like a lot of therapists kind of say that. It's like their own stuff that brings
RDs. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty common. It's pretty common. But honestly, it makes us good at what we do. Obviously we have the education, but being able to really empathize with someone and knowing that everyone's story is different, but that you have similar pain points and you know how it feels to have anxiety or depression, it definitely helps to really understand someone rather than just sympathize with someone.
Exactly. I always say to my clients, especially if they're inquiring about a particular aspect of my life, well, have you been a mother? Or, have you had experience with this? I might say, well, I haven't been a mother, but I have been a daughter. Or, I haven't had this particular experience, but I have gone through something similar. I've helped somebody through something similar. So yeah, just being able to expand that empathy and kind of get creative in doing that too has been really fun.
That's a good point. So you brought up that you do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. So I think it'd be great for us to kind of just talk about it, because I think people hear it, they say, you'll hear they do CBT or they should do CBT. And it's I don't know if it's ever really been clearly identified of what that actually is. And if you wouldn't mind maybe just sharing a little bit more about that, I think that would be helpful for the listeners.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. So cognitive behavioral therapy, the best way to kind of, I guess, maybe visualize it, since I'm a very visual learner and maybe a lot of the listeners are too, is to kind of picture like a triangle in your mind. So at the 3 points, there's your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. And at any given time, all of those things are interacting with each other in some way or another, or maybe two are interacting and one might interact later, or so on and so forth. So cognitive behavioral therapy basically kind of enters the cycle or enters the triangle from the point of the cognition, which is basically just a fancy word for thought. So it's like examining the way that you're looking at a situation or interpreting a situation and seeing if maybe the way you're looking at it is not super helpful. So like an example I kind of give people during like an intro session to CBT might be if you're walking down the street in New York and you see somebody kind of following you quickly and then starting to like run after you and wave, you know, what's your first thought? Is your first thought, I'm in danger, something bad is going to happen to me, whatever negative thing it could be. I mean, I know that, you know, first moving to New York, that would definitely have been my thought as a young woman. But then, you know, so then I introduced this idea of, well, what if you had more information? What if you had dropped your wallet and this person was running after you, trying to give you your wallet or some money that fell out or your phone or whatever it might be? Mm-hmm. Then you might think like, wow, I'm so relieved. I'm so grateful. You know, thank God for this person. So in both of those situations, you have two totally different thoughts and appraisals of the situation, and you're going to feel differently as a result.
Right.
On the first one, you're going to feel anxious, maybe a little angry, scared. The second one, you're going to feel, like I said, grateful, happy, relieved. And then your behavior is going to change as the result of either of those feelings too. In the first scenario, you might respond with hostility or yell or say like, get away from me. The second one, you're going to say thank you and express gratitude, and then maybe go on and the rest of your night will be filled with more pleasant interactions because you feel good. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of how having more information or thinking differently about a situation can really change like the vicious cycle of those thoughts and feelings. So yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just, so it's thoughts. So the thoughts would be thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, or is it? Okay. And so what you're saying is that if you change your thought, it will probably change your behavior, which then will change your feeling. Correct.
Or you could look at it the other way. Your thoughts might make you feel good, right? Mm-hmm. And then you might make better choices because you're feeling good.
Right.
Like in the case of maybe someone who's trying to implement an exercise routine, this is super, super common. Like if you have a negative thought immediately when you look in the mirror about how your body looks or about how your clothes fit, you're going to, if you think something negatively about yourself, you could make the argument that it might motivate you to exercise more, but I feel like with the people I work with, more often than not, it's discouraging. And then you're like, well, why do I even bother getting on the bike? Why should I go outside for a while? Versus, I think it was Emma Lovewell from Peloton posted something really great today about do something because you love your body, not because you want to change it. Mm-hmm. So that kind of shift is a perfect example of CBT. You're doing something for your body. And having the thought be more positive to motivate you instead.
That's powerful. I think that's really, really great. So shifting gears to like the actual topic. So what we wanted to talk about today is seasonal affective disorder. Mm-hmm. And can you maybe just describe what that actually is and then how to know if you're dealing with that or depression year round, like, or is it just like, we're just bummed out because of what's going on with COVID-19?
Yeah, totally. So depression, seasonal depression is basically, if you look at depression in general, condensed into the winter months. So with an onset of around right now, when it starts to get cold, right after daylight savings time. So like mid-November, usually lasting like through March, in some climates, maybe through April. But around that, the winter time frame. And the symptoms of depression are, obviously like the hallmark one is really sadness. So it's kind of like a persistent, almost like an ache that you can't get rid of, rather than just a sadness in response to an event that would normally make you sad. Mm-hmm. So that's like the number one, is just feeling sad. But some of the other big changes that can happen are like hopelessness, helplessness, feeling worthless, feeling overwhelmingly guilty and not really sure why, like just kind of like that feeling that everything's your fault, that people are looking at you, that you did something to offend people. The ones that where it gets a little bit, to speak to your point about COVID and being in quarantine all this time, gets a little fuzzy, are like sleep and appetite, concentration, and energy and motivation. So, you know, and I would say sadness too, to a certain extent. I mean, this is an extended period of sadness. Does that mean you're depressed because you've been sad about, you know, COVID and the state of the world? Like, not necessarily. Some of that's realistic.
Right.
But I think like with sleep and appetite, what you really want to look out for is such a disturbance or such a problem with sleep or appetite that you can't function. So, you know, by function, I mean like you can't go to work, or, you know, your friends say that you've gone MIA, or your family's really worried about you. So, and the same thing kind of goes for the motivation and the energy. If any of those things dip below a point where you can't function, it's most likely depression or seasonal depression, depending on like when in the year that it follows.
Yeah. So one thing that just came to me is I was talking with a few clients this week, actually, and a lot of them kind of just talked about how, because it's getting darker out earlier, they're not like feeling motivated anymore. They don't feel like motivated to do a workout. Like they are sleeping more. Like, is it really related to it just like being darker out, colder out, like, or I guess like, is there like a chemical change that happens in the brain at that time? Like, or is it just like, it's harder to be happy when it's dark all the time? Yeah.
I think the answer to your question is kind of a little bit of both. Right. And it also could be how you're individually wired. Like some people really love the winter. They get super excited about staying inside and being cozy.
You can see my face, but I just made
I'm not. Sometimes I'm like, why do I live in the Northeast if I
every winter I complain.
Last winter here.
Yeah.
No. But I can't wait till I'm old enough and like stable enough financially to snowbird and just like get out.
That will be me. That will be me. That was my plan for 2020, but then, you know, COVID happened. But I was like, I'm just going to travel. And my whole goal, there's such a funny TikTok about this. Sorry, I go off on tangents. There's such a funny TikTok about some girl. She like wrote out like her whole list of like all she wanted for 2020. And it was like, be more social, go vacation more. It was literally, I was dying, and it was so funny. It was so funny. But yeah, anyways, so yeah, snowboarding would be amazing.
But in the meantime, we have resources like this to help people get through if they are in areas where it's cold. But yeah, so I think some people are wired that way. There is definitely a biological component to it though, because our circadian rhythm totally changes after daylight savings time. I mean, it changes to the point where we can reasonably adapt because we've evolved enough. But yeah, the levels of melatonin get a little funky. The sleep-wake system kind of like doesn't really know what it's doing for a little bit. It might feel like it needs to overcompensate. Then once you start overcompensating with sleep, it makes it really difficult to keep it up and get back to where you were. So there's definitely a biochemical component to it.
So, okay, that's so good. That's a good point then. Now, if someone is struggling with seasonal depression or just depression in general, what are the treatments? And if it's a chemical thing, is there, you know, should someone consider taking medication, or like what can someone do if they're struggling with seasonal depression?
Yeah. So the one thing I'll say about either one is medications can help for both. So if you go to a psychiatrist, they might recommend an SSRI, which works on serotonin. That's probably, if anyone's taken a Psych 101 class, maybe that's the most common neurotransmitter that's brought up because that's like the happy neurotransmitter. So medications are kind of used in both cases of whether it's seasonal or regular depression, or even just like going through a rough patch. People take antidepressants for a short amount of time.
But on the beginning, when COVID started happening, I mean, you know, I work with a lot of people, and like it was, and even just people I talk to, a lot of my friends are nurses. Like it just, things were happening at a very rapid pace. There was so much unknown, and there's no shame in that, guys, by the way. Like, a lot of people were expressing to me that they went to their psychiatrist, their therapist recommended them they take a medication temporarily to help them just get through all of the stuff, like just all the stuff. And it's obviously better to do it through a mental health professional than recreationally, where that can be, unfortunately, what we're also seeing during this time, is a lot of people self-medicating.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I meant to mention that when we were talking just now about depression, that sometimes that is the symptom that comes up, is you notice you're needing more and more wine to fall asleep at night, or, you're borrowing somebody's medication that just to try it. And that might be the sign that something else is going on underlying.
Right. And so that's like another thing too, that like, it's funny to like, there's so many jokes, like, and I'm just using TikTok, for example, because it's the newest platform and I also love it and it's like amazing. But like so many people make jokes about how much how much drinking they're doing. And like, that's like, how they're getting through. And it's like, it could be funny, but like, it also is like serious. So we have to like really make sure that you understand that. Because I also think because, alcohol is universally legal for 21 and up, whereas like other drugs aren't. So it's like almost like socially acceptable to have, maybe 3 glasses of wine every night or 4 glasses. I don't know what the limit is for what people think is, but all I'm saying is it can be easily like unnoticed or hidden. When you have to really know yourself and like really be honest with yourself. Like, am I doing this for, because I'm stuck? And I don't know, but I think that's an honest conversation people need to start having with themselves.
Totally. It's a social norm too, right? And it's kind of like you see everybody else making jokes about it. And what are you doing during quarantine, and how are you getting by? And definitely. But again, I go back to, if your functioning is just not where it was, and that it's decreased, honestly, then yeah, it's something to take a look at with a therapist for sure.
So what are some other ways if someone does it, maybe, and there's also a lot of people that tell me they don't want to take medication. They won't. Totally. So like, what are other ways to heal or help with seasonal depression or depression in general?
So one of the biggest ones for seasonal depression is using the light boxes or light therapy. They have become, I'm pretty sure back in the day you needed a prescription for one, because I actually had seasonal depression for a lot of my youth and I'd say young adulthood. It's been resolved for the most part. But I used one of those lamps in high school. So I can speak a little bit to my experience with that, but, and just to what I've read in the literature, but it's basically mine was like a giant at the time. I'm sure they're much like sleek, but it was like a giant UFO looking contraption.
It's so funny to think about technology and the advances and stuff.
It's like, so funny.
It used to be like, I think of like, I was watching Saved by the Bell the other day, like the gigantic phone.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, just imagine the biggest, like, obnoxious looking lamp. That's what it was. It's kind of like how my lamp is now looking. I know you can't see it, but it's like, you don't want to look directly at it. So you have it sort of going down on you, almost like the sun would be shining on you. So kind of like from above. And you do something else. So in the morning, I would put my makeup on. I would like do my morning routine. And they said I'm pretty sure I didn't have it on for any more than 20 minutes. And the literature says like 15 to 30 minutes is pretty optimal. So now you can get them just on Amazon, I'm pretty sure, on other retailers. I would probably recommend just speaking with a doctor if it is at that point that you think you need one. It's probably a good idea just to talk to a professional to see which ones they recommend. The type of light, I think it's called like Lux, Lux. And the reason it works more than just like having a bunch of lights on in your house or, shining a flashlight on your face or whatever, is it's a specific kind of light that activates through your retina the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that regulates the circadian rhythm. So that's the part that kind of gets a little bit out of whack. So it's something about through the eye and the stimulation there that activates that part of the brain. And it simulates sunlight in a way that tells your body, okay, we need to release this hormone because the light's coming in and it's time to wake up. And we need to have energy now to get through the day. And then from there, it ideally, if you're doing other things to take care of yourself, like eating and hydrating and walking around, it's a vicious cycle in a good way. So it keeps itself going.
Right. That is actually a really great point. I'm glad that you mentioned that, right? So like you can get the lights or you could take the medication, but if you're not doing the other things, chances are it's going to be a lot harder to manage the depression and make it a little bit better. So can you speak a little bit more to like regarding kind of lifestyle changes or behavior modifications that someone could make if they're struggling with seasonal depression?
Yeah, definitely. So I usually start with sleep because I think it's such a good basic function that we can really neglect because it's in the off hours of the day when our minds aren't active. So it's easy to I think it's so easy to push it aside. I see it happen to people a lot. But sleep is so, so important because it's actually where you regenerate the hormones that you need while you're awake. So you're basically sleeping so that you can be more effective when you're awake, which I think on a basic level makes sense, right? Like we want to sleep so we can be energized. But from a hormonal perspective, it's really, really important. The same thing goes in reverse. When you're awake, you want to make the most of your awake time because that's what builds up the adenosine, which is the sleep hormone. And that's what you need to fall asleep and to stay asleep. So they kind of work in tandem with each other. It's melatonin and adenosine. They work hand in hand. So anyway, all that to say, the best way to kick off a good sleep routine is to decide when you want to go to bed and when you want to wake up. And if you've been notoriously bad with sleep and you're an anxious sleeper or you get restless, maybe pick one to start with first. So focus first on falling asleep. And then when you get that regular, then you can add, okay, now I want to wake up at 6 a.m. every day and then start building that into your routine. You also want to minimize, it sounds strange. I want to make sure I say this correctly because it could be confusing. Minimize the time that you're in bed in that you're going to maximize the time that you're sleeping. So don't be in bed if you're not sleeping, basically.
Right.
If you do, keep it to like 30 minutes and keep it very, reading, listening to a meditation, putting on lotion, like something calming, and I am like, not practicing what I preach always, but like scrolling on TikTok or Instagram or catching up on work emails. Like none of those things should be in the bedroom. The bedroom is for two things. It's for sleep and for sex. That's it.
Yeah.
If you really want good sleep hygiene, that's what the bedroom is for. And I know that's hard with in lockdown too. Like people really have had to get creative. I had one client that would take, I forget what it was. I think she would meditate in her closet or something because it was just a separate space.
Yeah.
Like, didn't want to associate anything with the different spaces. And I was like, that's awesome. That's creative. If you have a big enough closet, go for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just like making sure the bedroom is a safe place for that. The other thing I would say, if you wake up, don't linger in bed too long and toss and turn and try to get your mind off of things. You can get up and go to another room and sit down and do something else. That's fine. As long as it's nothing with blue light or nothing super stimulating. Like don't get up and cook a full meal if you can't sleep, but just get up and try to relax in another room, because then what you're saying to your mind is, the bedroom is a safe place for sleep, and I'm going to do all of this anxious stuff out here instead. So when I'm all done with that, then I can go back to bed. I guess the other big thing is when your thoughts just won't leave you alone. There's actually some research in dialectical behavioral therapy that says it's okay to entertain your thoughts to a point. So if you really can't let go of your worst case scenario thoughts and your anxiety is just super ruminating, let yourself go there for a little bit. Maybe rehearse what you would do if that worst case scenario came true. But try not to spend more than like 10 to 15 minutes on that, because then it can really spiral out of control.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that, one thing that, with my clients I work on is obviously their nutrition, but we look at other, healthy lifestyle behaviors and getting, on a sleep schedule. And it's not that they struggle with like getting into the bedroom, turning off all the things, like getting in the bed, using the bed as the only thing that they do. They can do all that. It's the anxious thoughts.
Right.
That's the thing that keeps them. So it's like, you could do all the things, but like, if your body and your mind won't just let you fall asleep, that's the struggle. Right. So it's like learning how to, maybe brain dump or whatever works for you. But like, that's the part where I'm like, okay, this is something you could talk about with your therapist. Like, this is where I can't go past here. We've done all the other things, like those anxious thoughts. Like, yeah, you got to have a strategy to really work through them.
I think for that, what I tell people sometimes also is don't let the fear of the anxiety keep you up. Because sometimes it's not even about, maybe what you're worrying about isn't a big deal. Maybe it's going to be fun. Like, what you have to do tomorrow, the outcome, but it's now you're laying there and you're watching the clock go 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and you're like, oh my God, and glancing at it every minute. And that's what gets you going.
Yeah.
So that's where you kind of have to take a step back and say, even if I don't sleep at all tonight, or I sleep a couple of hours, I'm resting, which is important. Mm-hmm. I am going to function tomorrow. It's just, I know tomorrow's going to be okay. It's not going to be fun, but I can do it.
Right.
So there's some surrender in, I'm just not going to let this anxiety over what might happen consume me. Like, let's just see how the night goes and I'll try to rest. Mm-hmm. So there's that camp. There is also the thought of, like I said, walking through all of if it's something upcoming that you're worried about, best case scenario, worst case scenario, most likely scenario. That's one that I do with my clients a lot. And usually when we're done exhausting all the lists of the scenarios, they're like, you know what? The most likely scenario is actually pretty close to the best case. And you surprise yourself how much we get caught up in the negative.
Yeah.
That can be helpful too, just to run through that in your head.
That's good. Any other like lifestyle sort of behavior changes?
I would just maybe run over the basics, like no caffeine past a time that feels right for you. I usually say 2 p.m. to be safe for people who really have problems. Exercise regularly is super, super important.
What about, because I'm going to play devil's advocate, but it's a real question. And I think people probably have it. Like, you're depressed, you're not motivated, you're sad. The last thing you want to do is move your body. Right.
So from there, I would probably say ideally working in conjunction with somebody, but start off with like the smallest, tiniest goal, almost so small that it's easy that you're like, I know, like, that's not even a goal. Like I do that. Like I do that anyway. Something really, really small, and then build a hierarchy up to eventually, in your best case scenario, what you'd be able to do, and start just building mastery a little bit at a time. Because what that's going to do is you're going to show yourself you can do hard things. You're going to check items off of a list, which always feels good. Sometimes it feels good. I know sometimes when you're really feeling down, it's hard. But yeah, I think like starting small like that and building on it is a good strategy.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that. Any other tips, behavior changes, things we didn't discuss today?
I would say self-compassion is a really important one too, just to add on here. This is like a really hard time for a lot of people. And I think when you go on social media and you see everybody so polished and like coping really well and like doing the best, it's really easy to feel like, well, what am I doing wrong? And why don't I feel like how they look? And I think just remember that everybody is suffering in their own way right now. Some people's suffering might seem different from yours. It doesn't mean it's any less valid. And sometimes it's okay to just feel what you're feeling and to not throw a coping skill at it. Like I fall victim to that sometimes, I think, as a therapist, that I want to fix everything. Like, well, this is a skill for this, and this is a skill for loneliness, and here's for social anxiety. And yeah, some of those are great and they do work. But sometimes the fact is it's a tough go right now. And if you don't let yourself feel sad, what you're telling yourself is, my feelings don't matter. And we don't want to tell ourselves that our feelings don't matter. They do. Right. And sometimes you need to cry it out, or, watch a soapy show, or, call your best friend, whatever you need to do to feel supported, to feel your feelings, I think is important. So, always having self-compassion, and kind of along that same vein, maybe there are listeners that aren't quite feeling, the seasonal stuff yet, but they know it's happened to them in the past and they're kind of preparing for it. It is never too early to start planning your coping. So like, if you feel pretty good now and you're like, nah, I don't need it, just like brush up on some basic routine stuff that makes you feel good, because if the day comes when you need it, you're going to be really happy that you practiced it. In therapy language, we call that coping ahead. So it's basically like looking ahead and laying your foundation so that you feel comfortable going into the tough months ahead.
Yeah, because it's a lot easier to implement things that are, habit. Like if you're already doing it when you're feeling good, right? Going back to like eating well and exercising, like it's easy to do when you feel good. It's the starting when you don't feel good that's hard. So yeah, I like that. I love that. Lay the foundation, make it easier for yourself. Do the work now when it's easy. So it's easier when it becomes harder.
I always say too, because I'm a runner and some of my clients run too, or they do other athletic stuff that's similar. Like I'll say I wouldn't have just gotten up and run my first marathon just right out of the blue. Right. I had to practice. I had to run in various weather, rain, snow, hot conditions, cold conditions. You don't know what the day is going to be like on that day. So, it's the same thing for coping. Don't start at the crisis point or when, you're at that low point. Have it in your reserves already. So,
right. Oh, this has been amazing. Thank you so, so much. Where can people message you, connect with you, ask questions? If they have anything follow up?
So my Instagram is Kara, Kara _bout, BOUT _yourself. So Kara about yourself. And you can follow our practice too. They post some really great material and interviews with different therapists if you want to learn more about seeing someone. It is _goodplace. And our website is www.agoodplacetherapy.com. So that's where you can find us.
So, and you're all based in New York?
Yes.
And how many therapists are in that practice?
That is a good question, because we just hired 3 wonderful therapists, but we lost somebody. So I think we have 18 people now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's pretty big. That's awesome.
Yeah. So come check us out. See if you, and you can always message me too. DM me. That's fine.
Perfect. I love your handle. Care about yourself. That's amazing. This has been so great. Thank you so much for your time, Kara. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, definitely screenshot it, take it, share it on your story, tag me and tag Kara. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, definitely hit that subscribe button. And if you're feeling really generous, write a nice review. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Toni Marinucci. I'm your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.